task we're going to talk about is inspecting pre-engineered fixed gas fire extinguishing systems. Utilizing your PTC checklist and your student trainee guide, we're going to go through and cover all our bases. First, we need to talk about hazards, cautions, and PPE. Make sure you're wearing your normal PPE for inspections, and possibly have a 4-gas meter with you in case you're climbing inside any enclosed spaces on a T-boat or anything else. Outside of that, one of the major cautions is if we're actively testing a fire extinguishing system, we have operating machinery, main engine, generators, any equipment in the engine room. You could have rotating equipment, rotating machinery. It could be high heat, also high noise, so you may need ear protection. But also, if we're doing the actual testing, make sure the owner-operator is familiar with the system and how to do the test. If not, consult the manufacturer's instructions, and also let them do everything. Let them pull the wires or turn the switches or do anything. It's their system. Let them take care of it. You want to try to not be in the space when you do it. Sometimes it's difficult. Just make sure you read the manufacturer's instructions for any cautions. So one of the first things we're going to do once we come on board is we're going to verify the approval of the system itself. There will be an approval number on there you can look up in CG Mix to verify approval, but it follows the local OCMI typically to verify the type and size for the space it's protecting. So once we do that, we'll verify that there's a remote manual activation from outside the space. Sometimes it'll be out on deck. Typically it's at the operating station right where the panel will be. At the panel itself for the fire pre-engineered system, there'll be an alarm buzzer, an audible noise, there'll be an indicator light, and a reset switch. The light and buzzer will come on when the system's activated, and the reset button is to restore functionality of the engines once the system's deployed. The systems are required to shut down any powered ventilation, if there is any on board, and also any operating machinery in the space. The idea behind the reset is that once you deploy your system, when you're out at sea or out on the water, after you've given time and they open up the hatch and they inspect to make sure it fires out, if they can use their engines, they should have the ability to restart their engines to come back. The reset button will typically bypass the engine kill of the pre-engineered system and let them run. It's also important to note though that Caterpillar engines don't require the reset switch. They'll run either way, with it flipped or not. So now we're going to actually take a look at the system installed in the space. If you can get down and get access to it, you want to make sure it's installed correctly. Typically verify with the manufacturer's instructions. You want to verify that all of your wires and everything else is tucked up nice and neat. You also want to make sure there will be a automatic activation point, typically a sprinkler head with a sprinkler bulb. You want to make sure that bulb is full of liquid and not dry. Looks like it's ready to be serviced. There should also be an active service tag on there from a fire servicing company. Verify that that's good as well. Then when we come down, we're going to need to actually operationally test it. To do that, we'll have the operator start the engines, and then we'll pull usually a wire or flip a switch down below depending on the system, which will simulate an activation of the system and will thereby cut the engines and sound the audible visual alarm at the operating station. At that point is when we would flip the reset button and try to restart the engines. Restart the engines, we have a satisfactory test. To summarize the test we've been talking about, inspecting pre-engineered fixed gas fire extinguishing systems, we'll use our PTC checklist, make sure we covered everything. First we talked about hazards, cautions, and PPE. We talked about verifying system approval, installation. We talked about verifying at the operating station there's a remote manual activation. Talked about verifying the automatic activation at the space and operationally testing of the system. Verifying whether it shuts down engines and fixed ventilation if there's any ventilation installed. If at any point there's anything I talked about that you have questions about or anything you'd like to learn a little bit more, make sure you write it down and ask your VO when we're done.